Mike Weber.
SNMP Extensions was a project that I got involved with a couple years ago with a company that wanted to monitor their servers strictly with SNMP. They didn't want to put any agents on their servers. And the other thing that they wanted is they had a problem with their website where people were purchasing products. They were using Java, and it was, of course, Java once in a while will take all the resources, and it was going down, and their customers were calling them and saying, hey, listen, we can't buy anything because your server's down again. So they wanted a solution with SNMP to be able to solve that by using an event handler to restart the web server. No matter what kind of programming they did, they couldn't fix it, so the best solution was just to restart the web server. So I started looking at SNMP extensions because it gives you a way to do things that you normally can't do with SNMP. It gives you an opportunity to find new information and some new options. So I want to look at SNMP extensions in terms of a puzzle. Now, all of you have built puzzles over your lives, and you can remember those puzzles when you were a little kid. I had 25 pieces, and most of those pieces had straight edges, so it was pretty easy to figure out. But when we come to SNMP, it's a much bigger puzzle. We've got a lot of issues with SNMP, and SNMP just has a reputation of being problematic. So I want to look at this as a puzzle and go to it as a way of solving things in terms of a puzzle, because I think that sometimes if we relate things that we know and relate them with things that we don't know, sometimes it helps us understand a little bit better. I want to look at it in three different aspects. When you get a puzzle, and especially when it's a 9,000-piece puzzle, when you get a puzzle, you bring it home, and the first thing you do is you split it open, and you dump it on the table, and you turn all of the pieces over so you can see the color side up. The other thing that you do is you take the box, and you sit it at the end of the table, and you look at the box, and you say, this is ultimately what we want to achieve. So the first thing that we want to do is look at the goal that we want to achieve with SNMP extensions. And so that will be the first thing. The second thing is we want to pick up those pieces. When you have a puzzle, you pick up those pieces and you look at them and you begin to sort them. You sort them by color. You sort them by those that are straight. So there's some kind of reasoning that goes through that process as you look at the pieces. So we want to look at the pieces of the SNMP Extend-MIB and start taking away some of the fear as we look at those pieces, so that ultimately we can go to the third step is start fitting this stuff together and make something that we can use. My goal this morning is to give you enough information that later this week you can go home and you can set up these SNMP extensions, and it's an easy process for you. It's not really that difficult, but it's just like a big puzzle with lots of pieces. It takes a little bit of work to work with. So let's look at opening the box. So this Ravensburger puzzle, 9,000 pieces, is quite a project. I don't know if you've ever done one of these, but these pieces are a little bit disturbing. They call them soft click. In other words, if you push hard enough, you could put any piece together with any other piece. It's a nightmare. This is really a technical project. In fact, on Amazon, this person that I'm going to show you here kind of represents how we look at SNMP. I have to be truthful, I have not finished the 9,000-piece Ravensburger puzzle entitled Underwater Paradise. Despite my valiant attempt at this immense and challenging endeavor, I simply don't think I'm smart enough or patient enough to do so. I've been bested by a puzzle, and I will readily admit this to anyone that asks. That's kind of a description of a lot of people that look at SNMP from time to time, feeling kind of stupid. A couple weeks ago, I started a project with a large corporation that does security on networks. And the manager I was working with, we started up this project, and I asked him, I said, you got all of these Linux machines, how do you want to monitor them? You want to use NRPE, you want to use NRDS, you want to use SNMP, and he said, well, I tried to do SNMP, but I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to do that. In reality, you know this guy's a smart person, he wouldn't have that job, but this is the same kind of fear that you see in a lot of SNMP projects, is that they become overwhelming, and part of it's because of the big number of pieces. This is ultimately where we want to go. We want to be able to edit the etc SNMP, snmpd.conf, and we want to create extend scripts. Now you can see in the examples, there's two examples there. We start with the word extend, and then we describe the command. We have a command name. It doesn't matter what you call this. I've called one df check, the other one HTTP event. And then the full path to your commands, and then any arguments you want to use. So the process of using these are fairly simple. And what we're really trying to do here is we're ultimately creating our own OIDs that we can use, and we then have new options with SNMP. Now notice these are extend, the word extend instead of the older exec. Extend gives you the multi-line output from the command, and it's using a name instead of a number. So those are a couple of new options. Extend scripts with Windows. It's possible, but it's not probable. So I'm not even going to talk about Windows. Whenever you talk to Windows administrators, hey, we want to add NET-SNMP, that usually gets a no. But if you go and check, it is possible. So if you want to do that with Windows, it is possible. So typically, SNMP creates and collects data. We're doing queries. We're doing all kinds of queries. But we've got limitations. And those limitations, we can't execute scripts. We can't use specialized OIDs. We can't respond to situations. And so that's something that we want to do, and that's one of the things that these extend scripts provide you. So when we're looking at the regular use of SNMP, we're collecting static data. Here in the first example, we're finding out, hey, you've got a process called HTTPD, and it's running on the server. We can scrape dynamic data, changing timestamps. We can look at the number of users, the number of processes. So we're scraping those kinds of things. So that's good, but we still have some limitations. One of the problems with this is a lot of companies will monitor their hardware with SNMP because they've got HP or Dell equipment that they have to monitor with SNMP. But they end up using NRPE or NRDS, some other method of executing scripts and plugins because of that. And what that does is, I mean, it works fine. If you're happy with that, it's no big deal. But oftentimes, administrators then have to learn two different things. They have to become experts at two different methods of monitoring, which is a little bit problematic. What we want to do is eliminate those limitations. We want to be able to customize the data that we collect. We want to leverage plugins. We want to be able to use any plugins and create any kind of data and collect that off of our remote server. We want to be able to react to events. We want to be able to create event handlers, fix stuff. We want to respond to security issues. So besides static and dynamic data, we're also then going to customize this information so that we can use these extend scripts. So in this example, df check. This is a simple extend script, bin df, and then human readable format. That's all we're trying to do. So we have options. We could use any of the options for that particular command that we wanted to and collect it in that particular manner. Reactions to events, there's an extend or script that will respond to the web server being down. So we can monitor the web server, and then if we see it's down, we can automatically start it with Nagios. We want that flexibility. I mean, ultimately the question is, why make the effort? Why do this stuff? We want flexibility. We want the ability to respond to anything that comes to that server. This provides us a way of being able to do SNMP monitoring and be a total package. The other thing is we want, if possible, to use check SNMP because it's a compiled plugin. One of the things that I see commonly when I look at large corporations is they do not think about this whole aspect of trying to save resources, and as a result, somewhere down the road, their Nagios server starts going slower and slower and slower because they've used so many Perl scripts and Bash shell scripts and Ruby scripts, the resources are going downhill. If possible, you want to use those compiled plugins because they're going to save you down the road. As you scale, this becomes an issue. So here's an example. On the right, resources used by Perl. On the left, you can hardly see it. That's the compiled plugin. This is why you want to use those compiled plugins as much as possible. Now, when you're doing things like event handlers, those options kind of go away. But for the most part, using those compiled plugins is a good idea. Okay, now just as a reference, give you a little bit of background with these extensions, there are other SNMP extensions. There are C modules, there's DL mod modules, Agent X, Perl subagent, pass scripts, exec is the old method, extend scripts, proxy. And I could give you an overview of these things, but this is not going to get us to that puzzle that we want to put together. So I'm not even going to talk about these. I just want to focus on one of those options, and that is the extend scripts, because it gives you the options to do things that typically you cannot do. So when you look in your standard MIBs, if you go and look in your Nagios, you can see, there it is, NET-SNMP-EXTEND-MIB. It's sitting there already. It's been there for a couple years. And so it is available to you to be able to use. So you don't have to install anything. You don't have to install anything on your other servers. If you've got NET-SNMP on your Linux, Unix boxes, it's there. It's there by default. So here's how it fits in the tree. You see 8072 NET-SNMP, NS extensions, and then the NS-SNMP-EXTEND-MIB. So then we look at what's inside the MIB. Now, when you look at this, this is where things start to get a little fuzzy. Think of this as the pieces. These are the pieces that we got to pick up, we got to look at, we got to figure out what they mean, because we want to use these pieces in putting the puzzle together. So this, then you can see, oh boy, these numerical values are going to get long. They're going to get a lot worse. You're going to have to get used to that and drop the fear of the numerical values. But you can see there at the second from the top, NS extend objects. That's a good place to start and start looking at some of these pieces that are available to you. So again, think of these as puzzle pieces. We're going to pick these up. We're going to evaluate a couple of these just to give us a little bit of information about how it's going to work. If we walk the tree and then walk those objects, we're going to see that you've got two commands here, df check and HTTP event. They're highlighted. But you can see that this gets a little bit troubling because we get a lot of other pieces that start to come into place. Now, here's a clue. If you are interested in extend scripts, do it one command at a time. If you said, hey, I've got 10 commands that I want to run, I put them in my snmpd.conf, just think of it as a 90,000 piece puzzle now instead of 9,000. So if you do it one at a time, it's going to be a lot easier to evaluate the pieces in how you want to put this together. But you can see the MIB then provides all of that information in how you're going to set this up. And some of these pieces don't matter. You're not going to use some of these pieces. Some of these pieces matter, but you'll put them in later in the puzzle and it'll be evident where they fit. Other pieces are going to be crucial in what we do. So if you can see down here towards the bottom, let's see if I can, right in here you can see there's the information that we ultimately want. we want to be able to see the human readable output of our root partition. We're going to change them all to numerical values. Now, go ahead and work with them in the text mode and use that. But ultimately, when you construct your checks, you want to use the numerical values because, again, we're thinking about resources. Everything you can do to save resources, so Nagios doesn't have to do anything extra, is going to save you down the road. And so ultimately, you're going to have some pretty disturbing number strings, but you're just going to have to get used to it and put those into your service checks. Okay, so the first thing that we know when we open up the box is we want to put the whole puzzle together. The second thing is we've got to pick these pieces up. We've got to take away some of the fear. We've got to look at what they mean. And when you look at them individually, you can start taking and saying, okay, here's some straight pieces. Here's some with a blue color. Here's some with the orange color. And you can start putting this together. So as we look at some of those things in the MIB, here's NS-EXTEND-NUM entries. Well, that doesn't sound too exciting. And basically it isn't, whoops, it just basically is giving you a numerical value, 3. That means that I have 1, 2, 3 extend scripts. That's all it means. This is no big deal. We can take this piece and we say, okay, we know what this means. We can set that down. We know how it fits in the puzzle. NS-EXTEND command. This is going to give us the name of our command. So if you look here, you can see extend and then the command name, HTTP event, dfcheck, who, whatever term you want to use, it's simply a term. Then when you run this MIB, you will see a list of all of those commands. That's all that this piece does. So we pick this piece up and say, okay, we know how this fits in the puzzle, and so we don't have to deal with this. Active. So NS-EXTEND status tells us these are actives. This is just a piece that is not that meaningful for what we're doing, but it's a piece that we can look at and understand. NS-EXTEND args. So if you use commands that have arguments, aha. So when we use dfcheck here, we've got bin df -h. And so all this is going to show is the arguments. That's all it's doing. So anytime you run NS-EXTEND args, you'll get a list of all of the arguments for all of your extend scripts on that server. And so the ones that don't have arguments, of course, don't have anything. NS-EXTEND cache time. Now this one's interesting because by default, the cache is 5 seconds. So in other words, if you have a command that you run, and then within 5 seconds you run it again, it does not execute the command. It pulls those results out of the cache. This might be a way for you to deal with situations where you were executing a script that took a long time or took a lot of resources. So you could take a specific script and extend the time of this cache. So you may want to extend it to 20 seconds, 200, 2,000 seconds, depending on the kind of thing that you want to do. But as you look at your scripts, for example, I work with a company that did a lot of scripting with their databases. They had all kinds of custom scripts, and they took a long time to work. And so that might be an example where you would not want to draw down the load on that server if all of a sudden it was executed before X number of minutes. Now, this is pretty easy to change. You can see the command here, SNMP set. There's our version, there's our community string, and then NET-SNMP-EXTEND-MIB, cache time, dfcheck. That's all it takes. 20, and you can see the result is 20 there. So we can set this cache to whatever we want to. It's a pretty simple process. One caveat is if you restart SNMPD, you're going to have to reset it again because it's going to go away. But easy to set up. You could set up a script that would do that for you. NS-EXTEND exec type. They can be exec or shell. These are exec, so they're going to execute when they're called. They're run on read. One thing that you'll have to get used to if you do something like an event handler is you'll set it up, and every time you call it, it's going to restart your web server. So you're going to want to be careful in setting up some of those things, because it just doesn't make sense immediately that every time it's called, it's going to be restarting it, because you'll see that thing restart a lot more often than you were thinking to as you were setting it up. So run on read. So here, again, we're just picking up these pieces, seeing a little bit of information, see how they fit into the overall scheme. NS extend output full. This is going to give you the full output if you ran any of these extend scripts. Who, df check, HTTP event. It's going to give you the output there. Okay, so as we started looking at these pieces, we started getting this foundation. We started getting some understanding. The other thing that's interesting here is you look at extend, df check, bin df-h. Notice that every one of them has 107 in the OID. This is a way to collect all those pieces if you had to do something. Think of it as a color. In a puzzle, what do? You look for the blue ones, you set them in a group. You look for the orange ones, you set them in another group, because you know that they go together. Here you know they go together because everything is 107 in it. So you're never lost. You're always going to be able to come back to this 107 to know that this is a piece of this particular group of these. Here's the other example, HTTP event, and this number is always going to be 116. So these all fit together with 116. So again, one's blue, one's orange. You're able to group these in case you need to pull that information up. Now, as you take these objects, these OIDs, and so we've got 13614, 8072, 1322, 127, 100, 102, 99, 104, 101, 99, 107. It works on multiple systems. This is also an important aspect of what we want to do. As an administrator, when you create these extend scripts, you want to do this for more than one machine, probably. And as a result, you can see that this would work on CentOS 6 and Ubuntu 12.04 as an example. So you can use these same MIBs, or not MIBs, but these OIDs on those multiple systems. However, you have to recognize that the results could be a little bit different because they have different file structure. So here on CentOS 6.3, which is virtual, both of these are virtual machines, so you get different output. The OID works, but of course you're going to get a different output. If you had a home partition on one and a var partition on the other one, of course you're going to get different output. But the OID works, and you can use it on multiple machines. So that is a part of this whole process that you could set up snmpd.conf that you could push to multiple machines if you wanted to. Just a second.
Okay, you said we had to modify SNMPD-conf. And let's say I added like 3 commands, right, in there. Whenever I restart, OID will be same, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what if I add another command in the middle of it? Does the OID change?
It's not going to change, no.
Or it stays the same?
Yeah, the order and all that stuff is going to be okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Okay, so fitting the pieces together. Because ultimately, you've got to have the puzzle complete. It doesn't do us any good to have part of a puzzle. We're going to be like that guy at Amazon that just didn't get it. So again, this is where we want to go. This is a pretty simple setup when you look at it and the options that you are able to get. But you get some problems that develop from time to time. For example, we want to use that df-h. We want to use that df check. And you can see here that we've got a listing of 2 partitions. We don't want 2, we just want 1. We just want to know about the root partition. Now, in the second example there, sure, we could write a script, we could use grep, and we could pull the right information out. But, we want to avoid that if we can, again, for performance. Every one of these little performance tweaks is going to help us down the road, especially if we're scaling this. So, as we test that plugin with check SNMP here, we can see that we've still got a mess. We've still got this dev information. We just don't want that. But if you go back and scan, walk the tree, you're going to find that you will find the solution, and there's the solution there, is we come up with a .2, and we get the information that we're looking for. And then you're going to construct your check SNMP. So we've got our community string and then -O. We're tying this into check SNMP. -O for the OID, and then we list the entire OID. And again, use the numerical value. You want to save as much resources as possible. So Nagios XI, there it is. Check SNMP. Put in the community string, -O, drop in your OID, and you're ready to go. So then you are monitoring that particular OID that you've created with your check, extend script. Same thing in Nagios Core. Pretty simple process. You've got to define your command, as in both systems, and then set up your OID in your service check. And ultimately, that's what it looks like. Now, we also want to do with the project with this is we want to be able to respond to events. And of course, this is more complex because we're not just executing a command and collecting the information. So in this example, Nagios is monitoring a Linux server, and it's monitoring the Apache web server. And this comes back to that example that I started with. This is what we created. It was a situation where Java would lock up, and we needed to be able to read the page constantly. If we could read the text on the page, we knew that Java was working right. If we couldn't read that, Apache in its usefulness is dead because of Java, and then we had to execute the script. Now, because everything executes as Nagios, you've got an additional problem when you start doing event handling or other options, is you've got to deal with sudo, because of course Nagios does not have the privileges to restart the web server. So this would also be a case where Nagios doesn't have the privileges to read the logs. So these are issues that you'll have to deal with. But we're going to execute the extend script, and that will be what restarts Nagios. So again, this whole process, we're using check HTTP off of Nagios to see if the Apache server's up. If it's not, we're going to execute our extend script, and it will restart the server, and then we'll continue our monitoring. So here's the sudo permissions. If you use sudo, these are the kind of things you'll have to do. Notice that the Nagios user has to be able to execute, in this example, 3 different commands there. And so it's not just privileges on one thing, it's privileges on a couple things. And the way to test that is to log into as Nagios, su-nagios, so you get the full environment of Nagios, and then try to restart the web server. And if you can do it, then you know you got the right privileges. It's as simple as that. But you're going to have to use sudo. So sudo, it works, but it may not be your best option. You may want to do something like ACLs. So here's an example of ACLs, because a lot of times people want to be looking at logs. So if we're using ACLs, so CentOS comes with ACLs already built in. It's all ready to go. If you're using something like Ubuntu, you're going to have to install it, but it works just the same way. The get file ACL on var log messages, we see that the owner is root, the group is root, etc. If we set these, the -m for modify, user, Nagios, we're going to give them read privileges to varlog messages. And so now you can see that user Nagios is added, and Nagios then can read those logs. So you could use ACLs in replacement of sudo if you wanted to do that. Also notice if you do an ls-l, you're going to see a plus sign that's going to give you a heads up, hey, there's privileges that have been changed here, and it's going to give you an idea that something's going on there. So ACLs are another option that you might want to use. Okay, so with this event handler, we're going to call that event handler, and so we're going to find the numerical value for that. So every time we call it, that web server is going to start. It's going to restart. So again, you want to be careful with driving yourself crazy starting that time after time, not thinking about that. Here's the script. Now you can modify this. This is a simple script. Host equals $1. The first variable is going to be our host or IP address. We're going to look for a string called Nagios test page. This is just any string that's on your page. So when we look at the command, we're going to use check HTTP. There's our host name. The string we're looking for, the -s, we've got to be able to read that string on the page. If we can't read it, we know that that customer can't use it. And if we can, we're going to grep for the HTTP OK and the 200. That tells us the page is loaded correctly. If so, hey, the web page is OK, and we send a 0, a green message to our Nagios server. If not, hey, we're restarting this thing, and there's the OID, and it's going to be read until it restarts and gets checked again. So basic script, simple event handler to make that happen for a web server. We've got to create a command for this, so you can call it whatever you want, but basically we've got one argument here, user1 with the $, a macro to tell you this is in the plugins directory. And again, we're just calling it anything we want. We're giving it one argument. And there it is set up. So there's our command. There's our IP address. You could use this for multiple servers if you wanted to, if you had the same kind of situation. That's it. Questions?
Is there a way to set up a command that doesn't execute on read? In other words, you had execute on read. Is there a way to set SNMP
There was an option to execute on read, execute on set. So
Okay.
what's the scenario that you'd want to do? What would you think?
I guess, especially while I'm testing this thing, I don't necessarily want it to
Yeah,
restart
well,
once every each time. So if there's a way to set that so that it only executes when I really want it to, that would be.
And that maybe is an option. You could probably set that. I don't know. I looked to see those kind of things, but you have to dig so hard to find those answers because they're not really out there. So I'm sure that that's a possibility, but so I would just set up a test server and set it up that way, and then put it on your production server once you've got it tested.
Yeah, hi. This is more of a comments for those who are going to use SNMP Extend, and I do use SNMP Extend myself. But first thing, I think you should look into standard MIBs. So data from DF, this is part of host resources MIB. So try to use Extend for something that you cannot get with any standard MIBs, because the way SNMPD actually is doing it is not very efficient. A lot less efficient than Nagios 3 or even Nagios 2. You want to use Extend for a few things you cannot do otherwise. So also don't use long names for Extend. If you when you actually try to start using Extend, what you will notice is the longer name you use for Extend, the longer OID you're going to get. So limit it to about 4 or 5 characters and names. That's going to be more efficient. And also don't execute any scripts with extend that will execute longer than a couple seconds. You can change the settings for how long it caches, but it is not the most efficient SNMPD is not the most efficient way to execute scripts. So the old version of SNMP actually could die if you have a function that, if you have a script that is not working well, you could basically block it and then it could die. The newest version of NET-SNMP, they fixed some of those issues, so you probably will not see it, but you still don't want to do something like this. You will block your Nagios, you will block all extend scripts if one of them is not working properly.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? That's all we have? All right.
So a question on the automatic action that you had as a result of finding a problem and you wanted to restart the server. Is that event action totally Nagios based, or is it an SNMP set that runs a script that does the reset?
Okay, so it's Nagios is using HTTP to check the web page. When it's down, then it will execute the event handler, which is going to send, it's not going to be a set command, it's just going to call that. Remember, if you call it, it's going to execute on the remote server. So it's not really a set command, it's just calling that. It's read, execute on read, and then it's going to take off.
Okay. Okay, so it's a get command that actually causes an action on the remote host,
Yep.
as opposed to a set.
Yeah,
Sounds kind
it's
of
not
inverted.
a set command. We're not setting anything. We're trying to avoid setting anything. We're just calling things. It's just a security thing that we don't want to be setting stuff unless we have to.
Okay, because to me an SNMP read command should just provide data to you, not actually go off and actually change something on the system. A set would be the command I would expect to use to make an
Right,
action occur
right.
on the remote system.
Right.
So I'm just kind of thinking about that.
Yeah.
Anybody? All right.
Okay. We talked about the what is that, cache value, right? You had 5 seconds, or let's say I change that to a minute, and then I issue a read command 2 times in 10 seconds interval, right? Does that mean it's going to restart 6 times, or is it going to restart once because that cache value is still there?
You're talking about if it was an event handler.
Yeah, I mean,
the cache, if you call that event handler, I think it's going to restart your web server. If you are looking for the content from a command,
okay.
it's going to pull that out of the cache.
Okay. I know. What I'm saying is you're reading the OID for that restart.
Yep.
Okay. If you have a cache value of 60, I would think that since it caches, it's not going to run the command.
Well, you know, you would have to try that. I'm not sure that the event handler would hold that, or if it.
It will not. It will not,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Anybody else? Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Mike Weber.